We begin a new series this week called Finding the King. The books of 1 and 2 Kings records about 400 years of the history of Israel and Judah. Long after the exile into Egypt and approaching the exile into Assyria and Babylon, the nation demanded that they have a king like everyone else to govern them. Up to that point, they'd had judges in the land guiding the people in their living and worship of God. In 1 and 2 Samuel, which precedes these books, we see the course of their insistence on a king and the almost immediate snares kingship brought with it. King David was the second king of Israel after the failure of King Saul, who had half-heartedly followed God's commands and ended up trying to kill God's wholehearted David, who started out just as a lowly shepherd boy. King David was the most famous of kings because he cleared out all of their enemies and established the kingdom from Jerusalem. His reign was certainly not quiet or peaceful. He faced conspiracy from his own sons, tempted into adultery, and on occasion his pride led him into making terrible mistakes. 1 Kings begins at the end of the life of King David as he lies on his deathbed. Another son is eyeing the throne, and the future of Israel is under threat. Resolution will be found, but in the most unlikely of places, and a new age for Israel will be born, though short-lived. The history unveiled in these books speaks of the human desire to be ruled, yet also its abhorrence towards governance. They recognize the need but hate the means. They refuse God as their king and keep searching for that perfect king to rule and to unify. What we have before us in biblical history is not the success story of a perfect nation, but the story of human failing and God's providential grace. This is a story about the power and work of God through the inadequacy of human kings, and whether they acknowledge God or not, that they are still subject to his rule and authority. It is human nature to desire something to rule over us. It might be a system of philosophy or religion or governmental system. Not only that, we want it to work for us and our needs. The most common root of sinfulness is placing someone or something other than God on the throne of our hearts. One writer succinctly summarizes the theme in 1 Kings as irresponsible leadership destroys nations. It's both a lesson in poor leadership as well as teaching us the traits we should be commending in our own leaders. Many in our world are seeking wise and just leadership, especially now, but just cannot find it. We're seeking guidance in a confusing age, but where do we go to find it? Well, our series on Finding the King will help us think about the lessons from the Bible and certainly think about God's guidance and practical application for our own lives. Join us this Sunday as we begin our series, starting with 1 Kings chapter 1 and King David's final days.